Hey everyone, Tactics here with more Season 3 guide content for The War Within, where this time we're going to be taking on Part 2 of the TAZAVESH Mega Dungeon, so LEAH's Gambit, discussing the major changes from the Shadowlands version of this dungeon, as well as going through all of the most important trash and boss abilities to help you be prepared for the start of the season. I've got videos just like this one for all of the other Season 3 dungeons, as well as written guides over on the Method website. Plus, I'm going to be putting out things like Keystone Legend guides, raid boss guides, and much more over the next few weeks, so make sure you are subscribed for all that content. Otherwise, let's get started with the plethora of murlocs that you're going to be facing right before the first boss, which, off the bat, to be aware of, most of these guys will attempt to flee when they're near death, so you may want to save things like AoE slows or CCs for when you start pushing them lower health. When it comes to things like important interrupts, the number one priority here is going to be Cry of Murglurg. Probably said that right. Who knows? Don't speak Murloc. This is cast by the Murkbrine Shell Crushers, and it will cause all nearby Murlocs to be enraged for 30 seconds, which is bad news for everyone, not just your tank. So make sure one person is always assigned to kick this. These same mobs also do have a tank buster in Shellcracker, which also has a knockback attached to it. So make sure the tank presses a defensive here, and watch out for where you get knocked, because there's a lot of ground AoE effects that you do not want to get pushed into. For all your extra interrupts, the Fishmancers here do a random target water bolt ability, so just send them into those to reduce your group damage. Otherwise, the most important Murloc in this area are the Scalebinders, who will drop invigorating fish sticks on the ground, and these just attempt to heal and buff all nearby Murlocs every 5 seconds. When these drop down, all players will want to swap to this totem and destroy it ASAP, otherwise these packs are going to live for a long time. For lieutenants in this area, there's the Coast Walker Goliaths, who patrol along with the Murlocs, and these guys just have a big group hit entitled Stomp, so make sure players are topped when this goes out, and use the defensive if it ever overlaps with something like one of those random target bolts. After you get past all the Murlocs, there's going to be 4 Stormforged Guardian mobs, and outside of a 12-yard AoE they do around themselves that you want to avoid, they will also shoot a line attack at the tank in Crackle, which also leaves behind puddles, so try and aim these all away from your group and somewhat in the same direction, as many as you can anyways, and step out of those puddles before moving from that AoE. After getting past those constructs, you'll be able to take on the first boss in Hylbrande, which alternates between a boss phase and an intermission. For the boss phase, the main source of damage comes from Purifying Burst, which is a holy hit on 3 random players. So healers, make sure these people are topped before the hit goes off, and if you aren't already topped, be ready with a defensive or a health pot. Outside of this, the most dangerous mechanic is Purged by Fire, which spawns a beam of energy under a random player that then chases them for several seconds, leaving behind puddles that remain on the ground for 2 minutes. Because these last for so long, you really want to do a good job of putting these in out of the way places, or even on top of other puddles if possible, and the best area is actually the entrance right where you come in. The boss will also occasionally spawn 2 Vault Purifier ads who you'll need to interrupt, as they will throw bolts out at random players. Plus, they'll sometimes channel Empowered Defense into the boss, which reduces his damage taken, so when that happens, use a CC of some kind to stop those mobs. Other than that, there is a physical tank buster with Shearing Swing, so make sure tanks press defensive for that. Plus, there's a tank targeted frontal as well in Titanic Crash, so make sure you are pointing the boss away from the group, and then you step out of that effect. At 100 energy, the boss goes immune and begins the sanitizing cycle intermission. This spawns 4 Titan symbols around the boss in the center of the room that players can run over to pick up, and then these must be deposited into one of the 4 security panels in order to stop the cycle. It's important to deposit it into the correct security panel, otherwise you take some damage, and to figure that out, you can have one player run to the very back of the room with the console and channel into it, which will display where each of the Titan symbols must go to every single player in your group, so you need to look up at that, and then drop your Titan symbol in the corresponding spot. After all 4 have been dunked correctly, the damage immune is removed from the boss, and you just continue with the boss phase. Once Hylbrande is defeated, you can step through a portal, leaving behind all those Murlocs in exchange for a bunch of pirates. Burly deckhands are the most common mob, and outside of just smacking your tank, they sometimes enrage themselves with Super Saison, so as tanks, watch out if a lot of these guys get buffed, kite if needed, and use soothes if you have them. The casters in this area are the Hourglass Tide Sages, and they just spam bolts into the tank, so make sure you are keeping these kicked, as the deckhands we just mentioned are already dangerous enough. They also just put circles on the ground near random players, which everyone should avoid. For group damage, there's the Corsair Officer and their random target sword toss hit. This is an 8-yard splash around a random player, so make sure you are loosely spread just to prevent this from cleaving. From there, we can take on everyone's favorite dragon pirate captain, which is a fight that is all about space management, as throughout the encounter, your group gets targeted by cannon barrages that leaves behind a bunch of fire puddles for 2 minutes. While the platform itself is quite large, you will run out of space very quickly if you're just constantly spread out and moving willy-nilly, so I recommend playing together and then trying to group up as many puzzles as you can in one small area. The more room you have, the easier it is to deal with the brutes that spawn throughout this fight, and these guys always come from the water near the ship, and they just fixate random players while gaining a stacking speed buff every 2 seconds. While you could swap to these mobs and kill them off, it's actually much easier to deal with them by hitting them with the infinite breath cone, which is targeted on your tank and it initially follows them before locking into spot and casting, meaning they are able to actually avoid it themselves, so you should have your tank always pointing towards the water where the brutes come from. To give them the best chance at success, it is easiest if your whole group plays towards the cliff wall furthest from those brute spawns, as this gets that cone as wide as possible, and to maintain this wide angle, you can just slowly move along the face of this cliff as you fill it up with fire puddles, and if you get all the way to one side, you can make your way back. In a pinch, you can also use things like stuns, knockbacks, and even roots, which will make the brutes easier to hit. Besides this, one player will occasionally get targeted by anchor shot, dealing a hit of damage and pulling them towards the water for 6 seconds, so make sure you do fight this pull-in. There's also a new magic debuff in Time Bomb, which goes out on 2 random players and explodes for group damage upon removal. On top of this, it does dot damage, which ramps over time, and it also grants the debuffed player a bunch of haste as a benefit. Despite this bonus though, I still recommend you get rid of these as quickly as possible, as the damage isn't really needed, and you don't want to get overwhelmed by the damage here. So dispel whichever player you think is squishier first, and then save the tankier player for when that dispel comes off cooldown. Just be careful here not to dispel at the same time as like an anchor shot, as that could combo someone and easily kill them in a split second. After the pirate dragon has been defeated, you can take one final portal to get you back to TAZAVESH, where you'll fight the final boss. Blocking your path are a couple new broker mobs, with the most important one being the Adorned Starseer. Outside of a random target line attack that you should be avoiding, these guys will sometimes spawn a wandering pulsar nearby, and this mob just spams AoE group damage as long as it's alive, so you want to make sure everyone swaps to it and kills it as quickly as possible. For more AoE damage in the area, there are casters in the Focused Ritualists, and these guys will cast Unstable Rift, which will likely kill people if it ever goes off, especially if it overlaps with that Wandering Pulsar, so make sure you save a kick for each of these casts, and then all of your spare kicks can go into their tank-targeted bolt. Once you've cleared out all these brokers, you can take on LEAH herself, which is a 2-phase encounter where to start you'll be fighting her unempowered form until you push her to 40% health. Throughout this phase, she'll occasionally summon 2 assassins to help her, where one player will need to be assigned to each of them in order to interrupt their Shuriken Blitz cast and prevent that additional group damage. For unavoidable group damage, there's Hyperlight Spark, which is a bolt that bounces between all of the players in your group, so watch your health when this goes out, and this is especially scary whenever it overlaps with the Collapsing Star. So this is a cast that is very similar and kind of what the second boss in Priory is actually based on, and essentially it creates a well on the ground. When you touch it, you soak it to use one of its charges, and this does some group damage. In the case of this ability, it has 4 charges, and then when you soak it, it applies a dot to your entire group, not just the soaker. So it does not matter who you have touching this well, this orb, whatever you want to call it. The dot this applies to your group is quite scary, so whoever you are having detonate these charges, make sure they stagger the soak such that that dot never gets more than a single stack. You also actually don't need to soak all the charges of this well. You can let that 4th charge explode on its own on expiration. It does not do additional damage when this happens. Again, unlike the Priory version of the ability, your only concern here is potentially a bad overlap with that previously mentioned Hyperlight Spark group hit, so sometimes it is just smarter to clear it yourself. Once you push the boss to 40% health, phase 2 will begin, with LEAH empowering herself as she returns to full health, gaining new abilities and bringing out 5 relics that they interact with. To start this phase and then intermittently throughout the remainder of the fight, she will gain Power Overwhelming, becoming immune to damage, and then spam casting Hyper Light Jolt. This ability increases damage taken from itself to all players by 25% with each cast, so it is important that you remove that damage immunity as quickly as possible to stop this ability from casting. In terms of how to actually do that, you need to use Hyper Light Jolt itself, which is a line attack that connects all players indicated by a red arrow. Every time this spell is cast, a blast of energy fires out, and you need to hit all 5 relics with it in order to actually end the Power Overwhelming phase. The best way to actually handle this mechanic is to have your group spread out and maybe use a ping on the relic that they plan on hitting with their beam. And then once the arrows start showing, you can position yourself such that the arrow travels through the relic that you have chosen to hit, and that will jolt it, and hopefully you hit all 5 of them in a single jolt. But note that if you do ever miss one, you can just hit it with the next jolt. You only need to hit the ones that you missed. You don't need to hit all 5 again, and just be wary of your health here. You may need to press defensive on a second cast. As for other abilities in this phase, it's mostly about dodging. First up, there's Energy Fragmentation, which bounces between all 5 relics and causes them to shoot out projectiles to deal heavy damage, so avoid those. Next, there's Hyperlight Nova, which creates an AoE around all 5 relics as well as the boss herself, so you need to step out of that. Of course, throughout this phase, the relics are going to be moved as well, so where you're dodging from is going to change. In general, though, I think the safest place to play is near the stairs where the boss actually starts, as the relics don't go past those. Otherwise, this phase, including that Power Overwhelming intermission that we mentioned, just repeats until you kill the boss. But there we have it, guys. That is my guide to TAZAVESH Solea's Gambit. Hopefully it helped you out, and if it did, make sure to subscribe to the channel and check out all of my other dungeon guides. Plus, be on the lookout for a bunch of great content coming soon, including Keystone Legend guides, normal, heroic, and mythic raid guides, and much more. Of course, I need to thank all my Patreons for making content like this possible. Could not do it without you. Otherwise, thank you to everyone so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video.